Right, this video discusses how you can use variables in a macro and also how you can carry out logic statements in a macro. So a complete list of all macro commands organized by categories provided in Appendix D of the book Mastering Ease, and these can also be examined by selecting macro command info from the macros menu. You can see that for each one of these a description and an example of the macro command is provided. You should also note that you can use any of the built-in thermodynamic math and string functions in Ease in a macro. And there's hundreds of these commands, and so we obviously can't go through all of them in this course. But you should understand how to use variables in a macro and also how to use logic statements in a macro. So macros can manipulate the variables that are used in your Ease programs, and you can also define new variables that are only used in the macro itself. So here I'm going to write an Ease program that involves the variables a, b, and c. And then I'm going to set one of their values, so in this case a, to a value in the macro. So here I have a equals 2, and with this a equals 2 and then my two equations up in the Ease program, that's 3 equations and 3 unknowns I ought to be able to solve, so I'll issue the macro command solve. And now when I run the macro, you'll see that I have a solution window, and it has a main tab, which is typical, which has all of the equations that are used in the equations window. But then there's a second tab called macro variables, and the macro variables tab lists those variables that are set in the macro itself. So in this case, it lists the value of a. Right? If I specify the value of another variable, for example d, that is only used in the macro, and then I'll run the macro now, and you can see that both a and d are listed here in the macro variables tab. So you can use a macro to manipulate variables, which is really handy when you're trying to do logic or you're trying to control your Ease program. You can program logical statements into a macro, and one way of doing this is with an if-then-else command. And typically you would couple the if-then-else command with a go-to statement. The calling protocol for an if-then-else command is shown here. You can see that the if-then-else macro command executes macro command 1, which is often a go-to statement, if the conditional statement conditional here evaluates to true, and if the optional else clause is included, then macro command 2 is executed if the conditional evaluates to false. The conditional test can refer to variables that are defined in the macro or variables set in your previous execution of the Ease program. The conditional test can utilize any of the typical relational operators like less than, equal to, etc. Compound conditional tests involving and or can also be used, and the order of evaluation of the conditional logic can be controlled using parentheses. Note that if the conditional command involves string variables, then you can only use equal or not equal to as your relational operators. One thing that you have to be clear about is that the entire if-then-else macro command has to be on a single line, which is one of the reasons why we'll often use go-tos in this type of a construct. So let's do a quick example where all I'm going to do is in the equations window I'm going to add two numbers together, and then if the sum of those two numbers is greater than 10, I'll have my macro beep once, and if it's less than 10 I'll have my macro beep once, and if it's greater than 10 I'll have my macro beep twice. So a equals, let's say 2, b equals 5, and sum is a plus b. So that should work. I can run that. And now I want to make my macro, so we'll have a macro window here. And what does my macro have to do? First, it has to solve my equations, and then if the sum is less than 10, then I need to, what do I need to do? I need to beep once, and if it's greater than 10, I need to beep twice. So there's probably a few different ways to do this, but I think what I'm going to do is have two beeps down here. And if it's less than 10, I'm going to skip the first beep, and if it's greater than 10, I'm not. So I'll just put a go to 10 here, and we'll have a line 10 here. So this should work, right? If I have less than 10, Then I'm going to go down and just do this beep. If it's greater than 10, I'm going to do this beep and then this beep. So let's see if that actually works. So that was one beep. And now let's make this, I don't know, 50. So the sum will be 52. I should hear 2 beeps. And I don't. I just hear 1 beep. So this is a good place to use the log. So right down here the log sits, and what I can see when I use the log is that let's see, it actually executed 2 beeps. So I think what happened is it executed 2 beeps, but they were so quickly executed that they sounded like 1 beep. So I think what I'm going to do then is, after my first beep, I'm going to put a delay of 1 second. So delay has a number that is in milliseconds, the amount of time you want to delay. I want to delay 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So now hopefully I hear 2 beeps. Yeah, and that worked. So the other logic statement that is handy is a repeat until loop. And the format of a repeat until loop is shown here. And the way this one works is the macro commands that sit between the repeat and the until keywords are going to be executed until the conditional test conditional down here is true. So a couple things: repeat until have to be on the repeat, and the until keywords has to be on separate lines, and each of the macro commands should also be on separate lines. So you can do a whole bunch of stuff every time the thing loops around, but you do need to be careful, because if the expression conditional is never evaluated to true, then these macro commands will just be repeated indefinitely, or at least until you finally press the escape key or the macro window stop button. So let's maybe modify our program so that it doesn't just beep once or twice. Instead, it just beeps a number of times that is equal to whatever this sum up here is. So let's be a little careful here and make it a smaller number, like 5 here. And then down here, I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff. So I still have to solve in order to have sum be equal to a value. And then I'll use my repeat until here along with a counter variable. So I'm going to define a macro variable I. We'll start it at 0. And then inside of here, I'm going to have a, let's see, repeat. And then maybe the first thing I'll do is I equals I plus 1. And then I'm going to beep. So still beep. I still got a delay, otherwise my beeps are going to sound like one giant beep instead of a bunch of individual beeps. I don't need this go to anymore, or this, I don't think. And then I'm going to keep doing this until I is, I guess, equal to sum. So hopefully that works. Let's make sure the volume is turned up real high here. And we will run this. So I should hear, I think, 5 beeps. So hopefully that makes sense, and I guess you can start to see how this is really handy for controlling ease programs, and what we'll find is it's also handy for using ease to communicate with external programs, which is something that you'll want to do sometimes.